Hey everybody, welcome back to World History with Mr. Finn. Today we are at the height of the Roman Empire. We have reached the pinnacle of the civilization. We're looking at a time period from around, just so we have an idea, it really started before year zero in 32 BC when we had Octavian, and we've run up to around the year 200 AD. So if you put those numbers together, we have 232 years of really the height of the Roman Empire before it does, as we said, get too large and we start to see a decline. And they try and do what they can, but eventually everything comes to an end, even in the Roman Empire that's been around for a long time. So this is the time period that we're talking about. Now, what about Roman culture was different, and what made Rome so powerful, made it different than these other civilizations? It lasts a long time. But one of the big things about Rome that we're going to see is going to be their engineering, in the sense of building. Now, a couple things to take a look at today with the Roman Empire and their building and engineering. They do a lot of different things. Like, their engineering is way above the other civilizations that we've seen at this point, as far as whether it's the shipbuilding, whether it's building bridges, whether it's building roads, the buildings and the temples and the cities themselves. As we said, Rome was the first city to see 1 million people. That means they had to have sewer systems, they had to have city planning. They were very advanced when it came to this. And a lot of things, if you went back to look at a Roman city and the way it was set up, was a lot similar to how we have things, where we have roads that go north and south, east and west, certain places for certain buildings, residential areas where people are living in homes. Rome is going to have all of that. So let's take a little bit of a look today at Roman building and what makes it so good. Two things that really stand out when it comes to Rome. The first thing is going to be the use of the arch. The arch is going to make the building go upwards. And now here's the reason why the arch is effective. I'll come over here to do the arch effectiveness on this side. An arch, what is an arch first? Well, that's what an arch is. Seems pretty simple, right? An arch. McDonald's has the golden arches. We have an arch here. Now, what makes an arch important for the Romans and building in general is when you have an arch, what you're doing is taking away weight, essentially. There's no weight in the middle of the arch. So if you look at, remember Ziggurats were those step pyramids in ancient Samaria, right? And they had different steps, and they built these levels on top of each other. Now here's the problem with this. There's weight there. So eventually, today, we don't see a lot of old examples of ziggurats, because what happens is if you have a bunch of weight on top of each other, makes sense what happens. It collapses down on it because it's just too heavy. But this is the way that they were able to build up. Whereas the Romans basically take all of the weight out of it and they use arches next to each other. And then they would have another arch here. And then they would have an arch here onto this one down here. And I could do this all day, right? I could just keep making arches. And the point is, this will go up. You're moving in the upwards direction. And they use the arch in all of their buildings. And they had, not to get too much into it, but barrel arches, where it was like arches in a row going forward, so like be a tunnel, so you could go like in a sewer system for them. It would be an arch that would go under the ground. And then aqueducts, this would be with water, an aqueduct at the top. Let me get building out of the way. Let me get this guy out of the way to show you kind of what an aqueduct would look like. Not that it's super important that you know what it looks like, but just for the purposes of class, I want you to at least understand why an aqueduct is important. On the top of this, there would be like a trough, is what they were called, and water would run down it. So there'd be water in here, and it would run from lakes and freshwater places and come to the city. And they had like 7 of these massive aqueducts that would just go on for miles, bringing fresh water to Rome. Now, why is that important? Well, we know from early in the year, you can't have a major civilization living in one spot without food and without water. Those are the most important things, basic stuff. And so you had 1 million people living in Rome, you need a lot of water. And so the Romans would build aqueducts that would look like this, and then on the top there would be a slot where water would come down, and it would eventually make its way to the city of Rome, and people had fresh water. So this is just one example of how you used an arch. But again, they used the arch in all of their buildings, temples and everything else that was there, because it allowed them a lot of flexibility on how they were making things. Now, speaking of flexibility, let's get to the second thing building-wise. The arch is super important for the Romans. But the other thing is something called concrete. The Romans are going to use concrete on a massive scale. They actually invent super strong concrete using, again, not to get too specific, you do not need to know this, but I'm telling you for your own good. They had volcanic rock that they would mix into this mixture, and it allowed them to actually have concrete that could be set underwater, which sounds crazy. And it also would be used, because the nice thing about concrete is, really think about this. It's essentially stone that can be molded. Molded mean it can be crafted. It can be formed into any shape that they want it to. Where if you look at some of the older civilizations, they could just use stone. They would have to use stone cutters, and this was just the rock, and now we have to make it into a block. It takes time and a lot of effort, whereas the Romans now could make concrete and essentially make stone any shape that they wanted to make it. So they used concrete all over the place too. So they have concrete, they have the arch. So this is examples of, why Rome is going to become so great, is they have all of these huge buildings, large cities, sewer systems. They're using the arch. They are inventing and using concrete. These are massive, important things. This is probably not as important, not as influential as the wheel, but think about this. Do we use concrete today? Yes. We use steel now, so we don't necessarily use the arch as much because we now have new material. But for us to come up with steel was like for them to come up with the arch. It is a new way of doing things that makes them very successful, and that is going to be important for the Roman Empire to grow. And they can use this in all of their cities throughout the empire. And these are the examples of engineering that we just cover when it comes to Rome, because they're very important, and we need to talk about them, but it's not as important as the overall, timeline of what happens to the civilization. But part of what we go over in class is what makes Rome so innovative, what makes them so great. The use of engineering is going to set them apart from a lot of the other empires that we look at. So these are just two of the things. We're going to look at some of their literature. We're going to look at some of their sculpting. Why don't let's do sculpting right now, just because it's kind of on the same path as building and whatever, so we'll mix it in today. Their architecture and their art. Those things kind of go together, and what Romans do, and this is interesting, Romans love Greek art, in all ways. Mostly sculpture, but they look at the Greeks and what they did, and the Greeks had a lot of sculpting and a lot of art and architecture as well, using columns and other stuff that you will get in some other classes, art. I think in math too, they talk about columns and symmetry. But Romans loved Greek art. They loved it. And so what they're going to do is they're going to try and buy up Greek art from the past. However, when that runs out, they start to make their own. Now, what they do that's interesting that the Romans do, I think is interesting, the Romans make it lifelike. Meaning that if you look at the sculptures from Rome, they will have wrinkles and they have detail and they make it very lifelike compared to what we call the ideological, the ideal person. So in Greek art, it's like sculptures of the gods and goddesses and things where it's just perfect, right? Romans are going to make it more lifelike about people like you and I, but it's going to look the same. So someone that if you just went there and didn't know this and looked at it, you'd be like, I don't know which one's Roman, which one's Greek. To us, it would look the same, but it is different for people who are into the art and architecture of these civilizations. And so Romans are going to have sculptures. They're going to have mosaics. Mosaics are things that so look at their art a little bit. Mosaics are art formed or made, created from small pieces. So what does a small piece mean? So here's what they would do, for example, just to explain what a mosaic is. Mosaics would be, you're going to draw someone's face, right? So you take a little piece of, this would take a long time to make, but I'll just do a basic face. Little pieces of, like, let's say ceramics or stones or something, and you'd make two eyes, and they'd be made with little pieces like this. And then you might have their nose made from little pieces, and then like their mouth from little pieces of, again, ceramic or stones or whatever. And you would put it together, and it would look, like a face. But that is what a mosaic is, and that's a part of the Roman art and architecture and all of that stuff. So you can even go when they find old Roman cities, you will see some of these mosaics still in existence today. And people study them and look at them and see this, and it gives an idea of what the Romans thought about things. Because if you look at the art within a society, it gives you kind of clues onto what people thought about certain things. And you can put stories together based on that. So this is kind of a brief look at Roman art and architecture. Again, we will look at some literature, we'll look at some other things, but the important thing to understand today is really the engineering is the major thing. The arch and the use of concrete is very important. It is a cornerstone of what makes Rome be able to expand and have large-scale cities, because they use it in everything. So, notes today. We'll probably do a quiz next class. And so because of that, turn in this today. We'll have the notes turned in today. And then next class, we'll keep going with the culture of Rome, and we will have a quiz on that day. So, again, make sure you get it to me today for attendance and participation purposes, and I will see you next class.